Welcome to a transformative journey, a golden path leading to the heart of vitality and personal fulfillment. I invite you to dive into Living with Enthusiasm, a treasure trove of wisdom crafted by the legendary Napoleon Hill, whose name is synonymous with insights that illuminate the road to success. Imagine a vast scene where dreams blend seamlessly with reality and passion fuels every action. This text is your golden key to unlocking the secrets of enthusiasm, a magical spark capable of igniting your life with the brilliance of a shooting star. From the first to the last chapter, Napoleon Hill will guide you through a fascinating maze of ideas and principles that have inspired generations. With a unique blend of captivating stories and practical strategies, Hill reveals how enthusiasm can be the invisible force that transforms ordinary aspirations into extraordinary achievements. Prepare to immerse yourself in an ocean of inspiration that challenges conventional thinking. With every word, Hill not only shares his timeless wisdom, but also awakens an unexplored force within you, an inner flame burning with the promise of a bright, possibility-filled future. As you read, visualize your life as a blank canvas, ready to be painted with the vibrant colors of enthusiasm. The path to success will clear before you, illuminated by the light of fervent renewal. Embrace every challenge with newfound energy, for Living with Enthusiasm is not just a text, it's an invitation to rewrite your destiny with the ink of passion and determination. Adjust your mindset, take a deep breath, and let the journey toward a fulfilling and vibrant life begin. Enthusiasm is about to become your life companion, guiding you to heights you never imagined possible. Welcome to the adventure of your life, where each page is a promise and every word a beacon lighting the way to your success. Onward, the future awaits. I gave a beggar a 10-cent coin with the suggestion that he invest it in a copy of A Message to Garcia by Delbert. You can do it if you believe you can. Enthusiasm is a state of mind that inspires and awakens a person to take action in the task at hand. It does more than that. It is contagious and vitally affects not only the enthusiastic person, but also everyone they come into contact with. Enthusiasm has the same relationship with the human being as steam has with the locomotive. The best leaders are those who know how to inspire enthusiasm in their followers. Enthusiasm is the most important factor in sales. It is by far the most vital factor in oratory. If you want to understand the difference between an enthusiastic person and one who is not, compare Billy Sunday with the average man in his profession. The best sermon ever preached would fall on deaf ears if not supported by the speaker's enthusiasm. How will enthusiasm affect you? Mix enthusiasm with your work, and it will seem neither hard nor monotonous. Enthusiasm will give so much energy to your entire body that you can continue with less than half the usual amount of sleep, and at the same time, it will enable you to accomplish 2 to 3 times more work than usual in a given period without fatigue. For many years, I wrote most of the time at night. One night, while working enthusiastically on my typewriter, I looked out the window of my office right across from the Metropolitan Tower Plaza in New York and saw what seemed to be the strangest reflection of the moon on the tower. It was a silvery gray hue I had never seen before. After closer inspection, I discovered that the reflection was of the morning sun and not the moon. I had worked all night, but I was so absorbed in my work that the night had passed as if it had lasted only an hour. I worked on my task all day and the following night without stopping, except for a light meal. 2 nights and a day without sleep and with little food, with no trace of fatigue, would not have been possible if I had not kept my body full of energy with enthusiasm for the work I had to do. Enthusiasm is not just a figure of speech, it is a vital force that you can harness and use wisely. Without it, you would resemble an electric battery without electricity. Enthusiasm is the vital force with which you recharge your body and develop a dynamic personality. Some people are naturally endowed with enthusiasm, while others need to acquire it. The procedure for developing it is simple. Start by engaging in the work or service you love most. If you find yourself in a situation where you cannot fully devote yourself to the work you love right now, you can proceed in another very effective way by adopting a defined main goal that includes your dedication to this particular work at a future time. Lack of capital and many other circumstances over which you have no immediate control may force you to engage in work you do not love, but no one can prevent you from determining in your own mind what your defined main goal in life will be, nor can anyone stop you from planning the means to turn that goal into reality, nor can anyone stop you from infusing enthusiasm into your plans. Happiness, the ultimate goal of all human effort, is a state of mind that can only be maintained by the hope of future accomplishment. Happiness is always in the future and never in the past. The happy person is one who dreams of levels of success they have not yet achieved. The house you envision having, the money you wish to earn and deposit in the bank, the trip you plan to take when you can afford it, the position in life you aim for when you are prepared, and the preparation itself are the things that produce happiness. Likewise, these are the materials with which your defined main goal is formed. These are the things you can be enthusiastic about, regardless of your current position in life. More than 20 years ago, I became enthusiastic about an idea. When it took shape in my mind, I was not ready to take even the first step toward its realization, but I nurtured it in my mind and became enthusiastic about it by imagining the moment when I would be ready to bring it to fruition. The idea was this: I wanted to be the editor of a magazine based on the golden rule through which I could inspire people to keep their courage and deal with others openly. Finally, my opportunity arrived, and on Armistice Day 1918, I wrote the first editorial of what would become the materialization of a hope that had remained latent in my mind for nearly 20 years. With enthusiasm, I poured into that editorial the emotions I had developed in my heart over more than 20 years. My dream had come true. My direction of a national magazine had become reality. As I said, this editorial was written with enthusiasm. I took it to an acquaintance and read it to him, also with enthusiasm. The editorial ended with these words: "Finally, my 20-year dream is about to come true. It takes money, and a lot of it, to publish a national magazine, and I have no idea where I will find this essential element. But I am not at all worried, for I know I will find it somewhere." As I wrote these lines, I mixed enthusiasm with faith. No sooner had I finished reading this editorial than the man to whom I read it, the first and only person I showed it to, said to me, "I can tell you where you will get the money, for I will provide it for you." And he did. Yes, enthusiasm is a vital force, so much so that no man who is strongly endowed with it can even begin to approach its power of realization. Before moving on to the next step in this lesson, I want to repeat and emphasize the fact that you can develop enthusiasm for your defined main goal in life, whether you are able to achieve that goal at the moment or not. You may be very far from achieving your defined main goal, but if you ignite the fire of enthusiasm in your heart and keep it burning, it will not be long before the obstacles currently standing in the way of your success melt away like magic, and you will find yourself in possession of a power you did not know existed. How will your enthusiasm affect others? We now come to the discussion of one of the most important topics in this reading course: suggestion. In previous lessons, we covered the topic of autosuggestion. In the third lesson, we saw the important role that autosuggestion plays. Autosuggestion is the principle by which your words, actions, and even your state of mind influence others so that you can understand this great power of suggestion. Allow me to refer to the introductory lesson where the principle of telepathy is described. If you now understand and accept the principle of telepathy, the communication of thought from one mind to another without the aid of symbols, signs, or sounds, as a reality, you will understand why enthusiasm is contagious and why it influences everything within its range. When your own mind vibrates at a high frequency because it has been stimulated by enthusiasm, this vibration is transmitted to the minds of everyone within its range, especially to the minds of those you come into close contact with. When a public speaker feels that their audience is in tune with them, they are simply recognizing that their own enthusiasm has influenced the minds of their listeners until their minds vibrate in harmony with theirs. When a salesperson senses that the psychological moment to close a sale has arrived, They are simply feeling the effect of their own enthusiasm influencing the mind of their potential buyer and bringing that mind into alignment and harmony with their own. The subject of suggestion is such an important part of this lesson and the entire course that I will now describe the 3 ways it usually operates: what is said, what is done, and what is thought. When someone is enthusiastic about the products they are selling, the services they are offering, or the speech they are giving, their state of mind becomes evident to everyone who listens through the tone of their voice. Whether you think so or not, it is the tone with which you make a statement more than the statement itself that convinces or does not convince. No mere combination of words can replace a deep belief in a statement expressed with fervent enthusiasm. Words are just lifeless sounds if they are not colored by the feeling born of enthusiasm. Here printed words betray me, for I can never express with mere letters and paper the difference between words that fall from impassive lips without the fire of enthusiasm behind them, and those that seem to burst forth from a heart overflowing with the desire to express itself. Yet the difference is there. Therefore, what is said, and the manner in which it is said, conveys a meaning that can be quite opposed to the intended one. This explains many failures of salespeople who present their arguments with words that seem logical enough, but lack the color that can only come from enthusiasm, born of sincerity and belief in the products they are trying to sell. Their words said one thing, but the tone of their voice suggested something entirely different, and thus the sale did not happen. What you say is an important factor in the operation of the principle of suggestion, but it is not as important as what you do. Your actions will count more than your words, and beware if the two are not in harmony. If a man preaches the golden rule as a solid rule of conduct, his words will fall on deaf ears if he does not practice what he preaches. The most effective sermon any man can preach on the solidity of the golden rule is the one he preaches by suggestion, when he applies this rule in his relationships with his fellow beings. If a Ford car salesperson approaches a potential buyer in a Buick or another brand of car, all the arguments they can present in favor of the Ford will have no effect. Once, I went to one of the dictaphone company's offices to see a dictation machine. The salesperson in charge presented a logical argument about the merits of the machine, while the stenographer next to him transcribed letters from a shorthand notebook. His arguments in favor of the dictaphone compared to the old method of dictating to a stenographer did not impress me, but his actions were not in harmony with his words. Your thoughts constitute the most important of the 3 forms through which you apply the principle of suggestion, because they control the tone of your words and, to some extent at least, your actions. If your thoughts, actions, and words are in harmony, you are bound to influence those you come into contact with, more or less towards your way of thinking. We will now analyze the subject of suggestion and show exactly how to apply the principle on which it operates. As we have already seen, suggestion differs from autosuggestion in one aspect. We use it consciously or unconsciously to influence others, while we use autosuggestion as a means to influence ourselves. Before you can influence another person through suggestion, that person's mind must be in a state of neutrality, meaning it must be open and receptive to your method of suggestion. This is where most salespeople fail. They attempt to close a sale before the potential buyer's mind has become receptive or neutralized. This is such a crucial point in this lesson that I feel compelled to emphasize it until there is no doubt about the principle I am describing. When I say that the salesperson must neutralize the mind of the potential buyer before they can close a sale, I mean that the potential buyer's mind must be credulous, a state of trust must be established, and it is evident that there can be no fixed rule for establishing trust or neutralizing the mind to a state of openness. In this case, the salesperson's ingenuity must substitute for what cannot be established as a rigid rule. I know an insurance salesman who only sells policies of $100,000 and above. Before broaching the subject of insurance with a potential client, this man familiarizes himself with the client's complete background, including their education, financial status, eccentricities, religious preferences, and other data too numerous to list. With this information, he manages to secure a presentation under conditions that allow him to get to know the potential client, both socially and commercially, There is no talk of life insurance during the first visit, nor the second, and sometimes the topic of insurance is only broached when the potential client is well acquainted. However, throughout this time, he does not dissipate his efforts. He uses these friendly visits to neutralize the potential client's mind, meaning he builds a relationship of trust, so that when the time comes to talk about life insurance, what he says is heard by ears ready to listen. A few years ago, I wrote a book titled How to Sell Your Services. Just before the manuscript was sent to the publisher, it occurred to me to ask some of the most well-known personalities in the United States to write letters of endorsement to be published in the book. The printing house was waiting for the manuscript, so I hurried to write a letter to 8 or 10 men, briefly outlining exactly what I wanted, but the letter received no response. I had not met two important conditions for success. I had written the letter so hastily that I did not inject the spirit of enthusiasm into it, and had failed to draft it in a way that would neutralize the minds of those to whom it was sent. Therefore, I had not laid the groundwork for applying the principle of suggestion. After discovering my mistake, I wrote a letter based on the strict application of the principle of suggestion, and this letter not only received responses from all the recipients, but many of those responses were masterpieces and served beyond my sincerest hopes as valuable supplements to the book. For comparison purposes, to show you how to use the principle of suggestion in writing a letter and the important role enthusiasm plays in bringing written words to life, here are the two letters. It will not be necessary to indicate which letter failed, as this will be quite evident. My dear Mr. Ford, I am completing the manuscript of a book titled How to Sell Your Services. I plan to sell several 100,000 copies of this book and believe that those who purchase it will appreciate the opportunity to receive a message from you on the best method of marketing personal services. Therefore, would you kindly take a few minutes of your time to write a brief message that will be published in my book? This would be a great service to me personally, and I know it will be appreciated by the readers of the book. Thank you in advance for the attention you will give me. Very sincerely, the Honorable Thomas R. Marshall, Vice President of the United States, Washington, D.C. Dear Mr. Marshall, would you like the opportunity to send a message of encouragement and perhaps a word of advice to several 100,000 of your fellow citizens who have not succeeded in making an impact on the world as successfully as you have? I am about to complete the manuscript of a book titled How to Sell Your Services. The main point of the book is that the service rendered is the cause and the remuneration is the effect, and that the latter varies in proportion to the effectiveness of the former. My book would be incomplete without some advice from certain men who, like you, have risen from humble beginnings to achieve enviable positions in the world. Therefore, if you could provide me with your thoughts on the most essential points that those offering personal services for sale should keep in mind, I will include your message in my book, ensuring that it reaches hands where it will do immense good to serious people struggling to find their place in the world of work. I understand you are a busy man, Mr. Marshall, but keep in mind that by simply calling your secretary and dictating a short letter, you will send an important message to perhaps 500,000 people. In monetary terms, this may not be worth the 2 cents for the stamp you affix to the letter, but if considered from the perspective of the good it can do to others less fortunate than you, it may make the difference between success and failure for many deserving individuals who read your message, believe in it, and draw inspiration from it. Very cordially, let us now analyze the 2 letters and discover why one failed in its mission while the other succeeded. This analysis must begin with one of the most important principles of sales: motive. In the first letter, it is evident that the motive is entirely self-interest. The letter states exactly what is wanted, but its wording casts doubts on the reasons for the request or who is supposed to benefit from it. Let us examine the sentence from the second paragraph. It would be a great service to me personally. This might seem like a particular trait, but the truth is that most people do not perform services merely to please others. If I ask you to perform a service that benefits me without you gaining a corresponding advantage, you will not show much enthusiasm in providing that service. You might even refuse outright if you have a plausible excuse to do so. But if I ask you to perform a service that benefits a third person, even if that service is rendered through me and if that service is likely to credit you, it is very likely that you will willingly provide it. We see this psychology demonstrated by the man who throws a dime to a beggar in the street, or perhaps even refuses the dime, but willingly gives $1,000 to a charity worker who asks on behalf of others. But the most detrimental suggestion of all is contained in the last and most important paragraph of the letter. Thank you in advance for the attention you will give me. This phrase strongly suggests that the author of the letter anticipates a refusal of their request. It clearly indicates a lack of enthusiasm and sets the stage for a refusal of the request. There is not a single word in the entire letter that provides the recipient with a satisfactory reason to grant the request. On the contrary, it is clear that the objective of the letter is to obtain a supporting response to help sell the book. The most important sales argument, in fact the only possible sales argument related to this request, is lost because it is neither highlighted nor established as the true motive behind the request. This argument is only weakly mentioned in the phrase, "I believe that those who purchase the book will appreciate the opportunity to receive a message from you on the best method of marketing personal services." The opening paragraph of the letter violates a fundamental sales principle because it clearly suggests that the purpose of the letter is to obtain a benefit for the writer, without even hinting at any corresponding benefit that might accrue to the recipient. Instead of neutralizing the recipient's mind as it should, it has the opposite effect. It causes them to close their mind to any arguments that follow, putting them in a mindset where it is easy to say no. This reminds me of a salesperson, or perhaps I should say someone who wanted to be a salesperson, who once approached me with the aim of selling a subscription to the Saturday Evening Post. While holding a copy of the magazine in front of me, he suggested the answer I should give with the question, "You're not going to subscribe to the Post just to help me, are you?" Of course I said no. He had made it easy for me to say no. There was no enthusiasm in his words, and sadness and discouragement were reflected on his face. He clearly needed the commission he would have earned from my subscription if I had bought it, but he did not suggest anything that would pique my personal interest, so he lost the sale. But the loss of that sale was not the saddest part of his misfortune. The lamentable part was that this same attitude caused him to lose all the other sales he could have made if he had changed his approach. A few weeks later, another subscription agent approached me. He was selling a combination of 6 magazines, including the Saturday Evening Post, but his approach was very different. Glancing at the table in my library where he saw several magazines, and then at my bookshelves, he exclaimed with enthusiasm, "Oh, I see you are a lover of books and magazines." I proudly admitted to the accusation. Note the word proudly, as it has particular significance in this incident. I had set aside the manuscript I was reading when this salesperson entered, because I could see that he was an intelligent person. I leave it to you to imagine how I came to this conclusion. The important thing is that I set aside the manuscript and was eager to hear what he had to say. With the help of 11 words, a pleasant smile, and a tone of genuine enthusiasm, he had neutralized my mind enough to make me want to listen. He had not yet accomplished his most difficult task with those words, as I had decided from the moment he arrived to keep my manuscript in hand, and thereby convey as politely as possible that I was busy and did not wish to be disturbed. As a student of sales and suggestion, I observed carefully to see what his next move would be. He was carrying a bundle of magazines under his arm, and I expected him to unfold it and start pushing me to buy, but he did not. You will recall that I said he was selling a combination of 6 magazines, not just trying to sell them. He approached my bookshelves, took out a copy of Emerson's essays, and for the next 10 minutes he spoke about Emerson's essay on compensation, in such an interesting way that I forgot about the bundle of magazines he was carrying. He was neutralizing my mind a little further. By the way, he gave me a sufficient number of new ideas about Emerson's works to provide material for an excellent editorial. Then he asked me which magazines I received regularly, and after I answered, he smiled while beginning to unfold his bundle of magazines and place them on the table in front of me. He analyzed his magazines one by one and explained why I needed each of them. The Saturday Evening Post would provide me with the cleanest fiction, Literary Digest would give me the world's news in condensed form, as would be required by a busy man like me. American Magazine would provide me with the latest biographies of the men who run business and industry, and so on until he had covered the entire list. But I did not respond to his arguments with the freedom he thought I should have. So he slipped in this kind suggestion. A man of your disposition is bound to be well informed, and if he is not, it will show in his own work. She spoke the truth. Her comment was both a compliment and a slight reproach. She made me feel a bit ashamed because I had done an inventory of my reading, and 6 of the top magazines were not on my list, the 6 she was selling. I then began to give in and asked her how much the subscription to the 6 magazines would cost. She concluded a well-executed sales pitch with this tactful response. The cost? Well, the total cost is less than what you receive for a single page of the typed manuscript you had in your hand when I arrived. Once again she spoke the truth. And how did she guess what I would receive for my manuscript? The answer is that she didn't guess. She knew. She took the time to ask me about the nature of my work, which didn't annoy me at all. She was so interested in the manuscript I had set aside when she arrived that she prompted me to talk about it. I'm not suggesting, of course, that this requires a lot of skill or persuasion, since I hadn't mentioned that it was my manuscript. From my comments on the manuscript, I suspect I admitted that I was receiving $250 for the 15 pages. Yes, I'm sure I was careless enough to admit that I was making a good living. Maybe she prompted me to make this admission. In any case, the information was valuable to her, and she used it effectively at the psychological moment. As far as I know, it was part of her plan to carefully observe everything she saw and heard in order to discover what my weak points were and what interested me most. Some salespeople take the time to do this, others do not. She was one of those who do. Yes, she left with my order for the 6 magazines as well as my $12. But that wasn't all the benefit she gained from the suggestion. By contacting my colleagues with the same enthusiasm, she secured 5 additional orders from my employees. At no time during her visit did she give me the impression that I was doing her a favor by buying her magazines. On the contrary, she made me feel that she was doing me a favor. It was a tactful suggestion. Before we move away from this incident, I want to make a confession. When the conversation captivated me, I spoke with enthusiasm. There were 2 reasons for this, her and the fact that she got me talking about my own work. Of course, I'm not suggesting that you be so indiscreet as to smile at my carelessness in hearing this, or to infer from this incident that the salesperson led me to talk about my own work, to neutralize my mind so that I would listen patiently when she was ready to talk about her magazines, just as she had listened to me. However, if you're smart enough to learn a lesson from her method, there's nothing I can do to prevent you from doing so. As I said, when I spoke, I mixed enthusiasm into my conversation. Perhaps I was infected by the dynamic spirit of that smart salesperson when she made that initial comment upon entering my office. Yes, I'm sure that's where I caught it, and I'm also sure that her enthusiasm was not an accident. She had trained herself to look for something in her potential client's office, or in their work, or in their conversation, to express her enthusiasm. Remember that suggestion and enthusiasm go hand in hand. I remember as if it were yesterday the sensation that overwhelmed me when that aspiring salesperson pushed the Saturday Evening Post in front of me and said, "You're not going to subscribe to the paper to help me, are you?" His words were cold, lifeless, devoid of enthusiasm. They left an impression in my mind, but that impression was one of coldness. I wanted to see that man leave through the door through which he had entered. It's not that I am naturally unsympathetic, but the tone of his voice, the expression on his face, and his overall behavior suggested that he was there to ask for a favor, rather than to offer one. Suggestion is one of the most useful and powerful principles in psychology. You use it in everything you do, say, and think. But unless you understand the difference between negative management and positive suggestion, you might use it in a way that brings you defeat rather than success. Science has established that through negative use of suggestion, it is possible to extinguish life. A few years ago in France, a criminal was sentenced to death. Before the time of his execution, an experiment was conducted on him, conclusively demonstrating that the principle of suggestion could lead to death. The criminal was led to the guillotine, and his head was placed under the blade after being blindfolded. Then, A heavy board with sharp edges was dropped onto his neck, producing a discharge similar to that of a guillotine blade. Hot water was then poured onto his neck and allowed to slowly flow down his spine to imitate warm blood flow. Within 7 minutes, the doctors declared the man dead. His imagination, through the principle of suggestion, had transformed the sharp-edged board into a guillotine blade and had stopped his heart from beating. In the small village where I grew up, there was an old lady who constantly complained of her fear of dying from cancer. During her childhood, she had seen a woman with cancer, and this vision had been so deeply engraved in her mind that she began to look for cancer symptoms in her own body. She was convinced that every little pain was the beginning of her dreaded cancer. I saw her put her hand on her chest and heard her exclaim, "Oh, I'm sure I have cancer developing here, I can feel it." When she complained about this imaginary illness, she always placed her hand on her left chest, where she believed the cancer was attacking her. For over 20 years, this continued. A few weeks ago, she died of cancer in her left chest. If suggestion can transform the edge of a board into a guillotine blade and turn healthy cells in the body into parasites from which cancer can develop, you can imagine what it can do to destroy germs of disease if directed correctly. Suggestion is the law by which mental healers achieve what seems like miracles. I have witnessed the removal of parasitic growths, such as warts, through suggestion. Within 48 hours, you, the listener of this lesson, could be bedridden with an imaginary illness of the worst kind in 2 hours or less through suggestion. If you walk down the street and 3 or 4 trusted people meet you and each exclaims that you look sick, you will be ready to consult a doctor. This reminds me of an experience I had with a life insurance agent. I had requested a policy but was hesitant between choosing coverage of $10,000 or $20,000. In the meantime, the agent had sent me to the company doctor for an examination. The next day, I received another summons for a further examination. This time, the examination was more thorough, and the doctor had a concerned look. On the third day, I was called again, and this time 2 consulting doctors were present to examine me. They conducted more thorough examinations than I had ever received or heard of. The next day, the agent called me and said, "I don't want to alarm you, but the doctors who examined you do not agree on their findings. You have not yet decided whether to take a $10,000 or $20,000 policy, and I don't think it's fair to give you a report on this medical examination before you make that decision, because if I did, you might feel that I am pushing you to take the higher coverage." So I spoke and said, "Well, I've decided on the full amount." That was true. I had decided to take out the full $20,000 policy. I had made up my mind at the moment when the agent suggested that I might have a constitutional weakness that would make it difficult to obtain all the insurance I wanted. "Very well," said the agent. "Now that you've decided, I must tell you that the 2 doctors think you have the tuberculosis germ in your body, while the other 2 disagree with them." The trick was done. The clever suggestion had pushed me beyond hesitation, and we were all satisfied. Where does enthusiasm come in, you might wonder? It doesn't matter whether it came in, but if you want to know who brought it, you would have to ask the life insurance people and their 4 medical accomplices, because I'm sure they had a good laugh at my expense. But the trick was successful anyway. I needed the insurance, and of course, if you are a life insurance agent, you wouldn't take this idea and apply it to the next hesitant potential client. Obviously, you wouldn't. A few months ago, I received one of the most effective advertising pieces I have ever seen. It was a small booklet in which a clever auto insurance salesman had reproduced press clippings from across the country, showing that 65 cars had been stolen in a single day. On the last page of the booklet was this suggestive statement: "Your car could be the next to disappear. Is it insured?" At the bottom of the page were the salesperson's name, address, and phone number. Before finishing the first 2 pages of the booklet, I called the salesman and asked for the rates. He came to see me immediately, and the rest of the story you already know. Now let's return to the 2 letters and analyze the second one, which got the desired responses from everyone who received it. Carefully examine the first paragraph, and you'll notice that it poses a question that can only be answered one way. Compare this first paragraph with that of the first letter, and ask yourself which one would have made the more favorable impression on you. This paragraph is written with a double purpose. On one hand, it aims to neutralize the reader's mind so that they read the rest of the letter with an open attitude, and on the other hand, it poses a question to which there can only be one answer, in order to compel the reader to adopt a viewpoint that aligns with the nature of the service being requested in the following paragraphs of the letter. In the second lesson of this course, you observed that Andrew Carnegie had refused to answer my question about the origin of his success until he asked me to define the word success. He did this to avoid misunderstandings. The first paragraph of the letter we are analyzing is written to state the purpose of the letter, while practically forcing the reader to accept this purpose as solid and reasonable. Anyone who would respond negatively to the question posed in this paragraph would condemn themselves for selfishness, and no one wants to face a guilty conscience for such a reproach. Just as the farmer first prepares his soil, then fertilizes it, and maybe plows and prepares it to receive the seeds to ensure a harvest, this paragraph fertilizes the reader's mind and prepares it for the seed that will be planted there through the subtle suggestion contained in the paragraph. Carefully examine the second paragraph of the letter, and you will find that it contains a statement of facts that the reader cannot contest or deny. It provides no reason to argue because it is clearly based on solid ground. It leads you to the second step of the psychological journey that directly leads to the fulfillment of the request carefully concealed in the third paragraph of the letter. But you will notice that the third paragraph begins with a small and pleasant concession to the reader, designed not to irritate them. Study the wording of this sentence and the context in which it is placed, and you will find that it hardly seems like a request. There is certainly nothing in this sentence suggesting that the author of the letter is asking for a favor for personal benefit. At best, it can be interpreted simply as a request for a favor for others. Now examine the final paragraph and observe the tact with which it hides the suggestion that if the reader rejects the request, they place themselves in an uncomfortable position as someone who does not care enough about the less fortunate to spend a 2-cent stamp and a few minutes of their time on their behalf. From start to finish, the letter conveys its strongest impressions through simple suggestion, although this suggestion is so carefully concealed that it is only evident through a detailed analysis of the entire letter. The entire construction is such that if the reader puts the letter aside without responding to the request, they will have to face their own conscience. This effect is reinforced by the last sentence of the final paragraph, and especially by the last 13 words of that sentence. You will read its message, believe in it, and guide yourself by it. This letter compels the reader to stand up abruptly and make their own conscience an ally of the author, trapping them as a hunter might trap a rabbit by making it fall into a carefully prepared trap. The best proof that this is correct is the fact that the letter received responses from all those it was sent to, although each of these men is the type we are talking about, i.e., busy businessmen who are generally considered too occupied to respond to such a letter. The letter not only received the desired responses, but the men to whom it was sent replied in person, except for the late Theodore Roosevelt, who responded under the signature of a secretary. John Wanamaker and Frank Advanderley wrote two of the finest letters I have ever read, each being a masterpiece that could well have adorned the pages of a more prestigious volume than the one for which the letters were solicited. Andrew Carnegie also wrote a letter worth considering by anyone who has personal services to offer. William James Bryan wrote a good letter, as did the late Lord. None of these men wrote simply to please me, as I was unknown to them, except to 4 of them. They did not write to please me, but to please themselves and to render a worthy service. Perhaps the drafting of the letter contributed to this, but as for that, I assert only one thing. All the men I have mentioned and most others of their kind are generally the most willing to serve others when approached appropriately. I wish to take this opportunity to affirm that all the truly great men I have had the pleasure of knowing have been the most willing and courteous when it came to rendering a service that would benefit others. Perhaps this was one of the reasons they were truly great. The human mind is a wonderful machinery. One of its remarkable characteristics is that all the impressions it receives, whether from external suggestion or autosuggestion, are recorded together in groups that harmonize in nature. Negative impressions are stored in one part of the brain, while positive impressions are stored in another. When one of these impressions or past experiences is recalled to the conscious mind through the principle of memory, there is a tendency to also recall all other similar impressions, just as lifting one link in a chain raises the other links. For example, anything that arouses a feeling of doubt in a person's mind is enough to bring back all their experiences that caused them to doubt. If a stranger asks a man to cash a check, he immediately remembers having cashed bad checks or hearing about others who had similar experiences. According to the law of association, all similar emotions, experiences, and sensory impressions that come to the mind are archived together, so the memory of one tends to bring back all the others. Awakening a sense of distrust in a person's mind tends to bring back all the experiences that have caused doubts in that person. For this reason, successful salespeople strive to avoid discussing topics that might trigger the customer's chain of doubt impressions accumulated from past experiences. A successful salesperson quickly learns that criticizing a competitor or competing product can bring up negative emotions from past experiences in the customer's mind, making it impossible for the salesperson to neutralize the customer's mind. This principle applies and regulates every sensory impression that lodges in the human mind. Take the feeling of fear as an example. Once we allow a single fear-related emotion to reach the conscious mind, it brings with it all its unpleasant associations. A feeling of courage cannot capture the conscious mind's attention while a feeling of fear is present. One or the other must dominate, as they are not good roommates, since they do not harmonize in nature. Like attracts like. Every thought held in the conscious mind tends to attract other thoughts of a similar nature. Thus, you see that these feelings, thoughts, and emotions, which come from past experiences and demand the attention of the conscious mind, are supported by a regular army of similar support troops ready to assist them in their work. Deliberately plant in your own mind, through the principle of autosuggestion, the ambition to succeed through a defined main goal, and you will observe how quickly all your latent or undeveloped capacity, based on past experiences, will gather and awaken to action on your behalf. Plant in a child's mind, through the principle of suggestion, the ambition to become a successful lawyer, doctor, engineer, businessman, or financier. And if you plant the suggestion deeply enough and maintain it there through repetition, you will begin to guide that child toward achieving the object of that ambition. If you want to plant a suggestion deeply, mix it generously with enthusiasm, for enthusiasm is the fertilizer that will ensure your rapid growth and longevity. When that old gentleman with a big heart suggested to me that I was a bright young man and that I could make a mark in the world if I educated myself, it was not so much what he said, but the way he said it, that left such a deep and lasting impression on my mind. It was the way he put his hands on my shoulders and the confidence in his eyes that made his suggestion penetrate so deeply into my subconscious that it never gave me peace until I began to take the necessary steps to fulfill that suggestion. This is a point I would like to emphasize with all my might. It is not so much what is said as the tone and manner in which it is said that makes a lasting impression. It naturally follows that sincerity of intention, honesty and gravity must be behind everything one says if one wishes to leave a lasting and favorable impression. Everything you successfully sell to others, you must first sell to yourself. Not long ago, a Mexican government agent contacted me to solicit my services as a propaganda writer for the administration in charge at that time. His argument was more or less as follows: given that you have a reputation as a defender of the philosophy of the Golden Rule and are known throughout the United States as an independent not allied with any political faction, would you kindly come to Mexico to study the economic and political affairs of this country, then return to the United States and write a series of articles recommending that the American people immediately recognize Mexico by the U.S. government, etc. For this service I was offered more money than I might ever have possessed in my lifetime, but I declined the mission for a reason that would not impress anyone except those who understand the principle that those who wish to influence others must remain on good terms with their own conscience. I could not write convincingly in favor of Mexico's cause because I did not believe in that cause. Therefore, I would not have been able to mix enough enthusiasm with my writing to make it effective. Even if I had been willing to prostitute my talent and dip my pen into ink that I knew to be murky, I will not attempt to further explain my philosophy on this incident, as those who are advanced enough in the study of autosuggestion will not need more explanations, while those who are not sufficiently advanced would neither understand nor be able to. No man can afford to express through words or actions what is not in harmony with his own belief, and if he does, he must pay the price of losing his ability to influence others. Please read the previous paragraph aloud. It is worth emphasizing by repetition, as neglecting the principle on which it is based constitutes the rocks and reefs upon which many men's main objectives are wrecked. I do not think I can afford the luxury of trying to deceive anyone about anything, but I know that I cannot afford the luxury of trying to deceive myself. Doing so would destroy the power of my pen and render my words ineffective. It is only when I write with the fire of burning enthusiasm in my heart that my writings favorably impress others, and it is only when I speak with a heart overflowing with belief in my message that I can lead my audience to accept that message. I would also like you to read the previous paragraph aloud. Yes, I would like you to memorize it. In fact, I would like you to copy it and place it where it will daily remind you of a principle, in fact, a law as immutable as the law of gravity, without which you will never become a force in your life's work. There have been times, and many of them, when it seemed that staying true to this principle would mean starving. There have been occasions when my closest friends and business advisors have strongly encouraged me to deviate from my philosophy to gain a necessary advantage here and there. But somehow I managed to hold on to it, mainly, I suppose, because I preferred peace and harmony in my own heart over the material gain I might have achieved through a forced compromise with my conscience. As strange as it may seem, my deliberations and conclusions on this subject of refusing to stifle my own conscience have rarely been based on what is commonly called honesty. What I have done regarding refraining from writing or speaking on what I did not believe has been solely a matter of honor between my conscience and me. I have tried to express what my heart dictated, as I claim to give substance to my words. One might say that my motive rests more on self-interest than on the desire to be fair to others. Although I have never wished to be unfair to others, as far as I can analyze myself, no man can become a master of selling if he engages in falsehood. The wrong will be revealed. And even if no one catches him in the act, and if he expresses what he does not believe, his words will fail in achieving their purpose, because they cannot be given substance if they do not come from his heart and are not mixed with genuine and unadulterated enthusiasm. I would also like you to read the previous paragraph aloud, as it covers a major law you need to understand and apply before you can become an influential person in any endeavor. In making these requests, I do not pretend to take undue liberties. I give you full credit for being an adult, a thinker, an intelligent person. But I know that you are likely unaware of these vital laws unless they impress you enough to become part of your own working philosophy. I know your weakness because I know mine. It took me almost 25 years of ups and downs to anchor these fundamental truths in my own mind so that they would influence me. I have tested them as much as their opposites. Therefore, I can speak not as someone who merely believes in their solidity, but as someone who knows what these truths mean, so that you cannot misinterpret my meaning. And to ensure these words of warning do not convey an abstract meaning, I will say that by these truths I mean this: you cannot afford to suggest to another person through your words or actions what you do not believe. This is clear enough, and the reason you cannot afford to do so is as follows. If you compromise with your own conscience, you will eventually find yourself without it, as your conscience will not guide you like an alarm that does not wake you up, and to which you do not pay attention. This is also quite clear. And how am I an authority on this vital subject? I am an authority because I have experienced the principle to know how it works. But you may wonder how I know you are telling the truth. The answer is that you will only know by experimenting for yourself and observing others who faithfully apply this principle and those who do not. If my evidence needs to be supported, then consult anyone you know who has tried to succeed without observing this principle. And if they are unwilling or unable to give you the truth, you can still obtain it by analyzing the person. There is only one thing in the world that gives a man real and lasting power: It is character. Know well that it is not reputation, but character, what people believe you are. Character is what you actually are. If you want to be a person of great influence, then be a person of true character. Character is the philosopher's stone through which all those who possess it can transform the base metals of their lives into pure gold. Without character, you can have nothing, you are nothing, and you can be nothing more than a heap of flesh, bone, and hair worth perhaps $25. Character is something that cannot be begged, stolen, or bought. It can only be obtained by building it, and you can build it through your own thoughts and actions, and no other way. With the help of auto-suggestion, anyone can build solid character regardless of their past. As a fitting conclusion to this lesson, I wish to emphasize that those who possess character also have the enthusiasm and personality needed to attract other people of character. You will now learn how to develop enthusiasm if you do not yet possess this rare quality. The instructions will be simple, but it would be very regrettable if you underestimate their value. First, complete the remaining lessons in this course, as other important instructions to coordinate with these will be found in the following lessons. Second, if you have not done so already, write your clearly defined major objective in simple terms, and then draft the plan with which you intend to turn this objective into reality. Third, read the description of your clearly defined major objective each night just before going to bed and while reading. Imagine yourself in full possession of the object of your objective. Do this with total faith in your ability to achieve this goal. Read aloud with all the enthusiasm you have, emphasizing every word, and repeat this reading until the quiet voice inside you indicates that your goal will be achieved. Sometimes you will feel the effects of this inner voice after the first reading of your major objective, while at other times you may need to read it a dozen or 50 times before reaching certainty. But do not stop until you feel it. If you prefer, you can read your clearly defined major objective as an affirmation. The rest of this lesson is intended for those who have not yet learned the power of faith and who know little or nothing about the principle of autosuggestion. To all those taking this course, I would recommend reading the 7th and 8th verses of the 7th chapter, as well as the 20th verse of the 17th chapter of the Gospel according to St. Matthew. One of the greatest powers for good on earth is faith. To this wonderful power can be attributed miracles of a nature astonishing. It offers peace on earth to all who embrace it. Faith involves a principle of such vast scope that no one can define its limits, or even whether there are any. Write in the description of your clearly defined major objective a statement of the qualities you wish to develop in yourself and the level of living you wish to attain, and have faith in reading this description each night to transform this objective into reality. You certainly cannot miss the suggestions contained in this lesson for success. One must be a person of action. Knowing is not enough. One must also know how to put that knowledge into practice. Enthusiasm is the spring of the mind that drives the implementation of knowledge. It is the most successful evangelist this country has ever known. To study his technique and verify his psychological methods, the author of this course carried out 3 campaigns with Reverend Sunday. His success largely rests on one word: enthusiasm. By making effective use of the law of suggestion, Billy Sunday transmits his own spirit of enthusiasm to the minds of his followers, and they are influenced by him. He sells his sermons using exactly the same strategy employed by many great salespeople. Enthusiasm is as essential to a salesperson as water is to a duck. All successful sales managers understand the psychology of enthusiasm and use it in various ways as a practical means to help their teams increase sales. Practically all sales organizations hold meetings at regular intervals with the goal of revitalizing the spirits of all team members and instilling a spirit of enthusiasm, which can be done more effectively in a group through collective psychology. Sales meetings could be called revival meetings, as their purpose is to rekindle interest and awaken enthusiasm, allowing the salesperson to resume the struggle with renewed ambition and energy. During his tenure as sales manager at the National Cash Register Company, which later became famous in the automobile industry, Mr. Chalmers faced a most embarrassing situation that threatened to cost him his job as well as that of thousands of salespeople. Under his leadership, the company was experiencing financial difficulties. This fact had reached the field salespeople, which may have affected their enthusiasm. Sales began to decline until the situation became so alarming that a general sales organization meeting was called at the company's factory in Dayton, Ohio. Salespeople from all over the country were summoned. Mr. Chalmers presided over the meeting. He began by asking several of his top salespeople to stand up and recount what was happening in the field. That orders had decreased. Each stood as requested, and each had a terrible story of difficulties to share. Market conditions were poor, money was scarce, people were postponing their purchases until after the presidential elections, etc. When the fifth man started listing the difficulties that had prevented him from reaching his usual sales quota, Mr. Chalmers climbed onto a table, raised his hands for silence and said, "Stop. I request that this convention be paused for 10 minutes while I have my shoes shined." Then, turning to a young black boy sitting nearby, he instructed him to bring his shoe-shining kit and shine his shoes right there on the table. The salespeople in the audience were astonished. Some thought Mr. Chalmers had suddenly lost his mind and began to murmur among themselves. Meanwhile, the boy shined one shoe, then the other, taking his time and doing a first-rate job. Once the work was completed, Mr. Chalmers gave the boy a dime and then resumed his speech. "I want each of you to look at this young black boy. He has the skill to shine shoes throughout our factory and offices. His predecessor was a considerably older white boy, and despite earning a salary of $5 a week from the company, he could not make a living here, where thousands of people are employed. This young black boy not only makes a good living without any help from the company, but actually saves money each week from his earnings, working under the same conditions, in the same factory, for the same people. Now, I want to ask you a question. Whose fault is it that the white boy did not get more business? Is it his fault or that of his clients?" A powerful roar from the crowd answered, "It's the boy's fault, of course." "That's correct," replied Chalmers. "And now I want to say this. You are selling cash registers in the same territory to the same clientele under exactly the same business conditions as a year ago, and yet you are not achieving the sales you did then. So whose fault is it? Is it your fault or the client's?" And once again the response was thunderous. "It's our fault, of course." "I am glad you are sincere in acknowledging your shortcomings," Chalmers continued, "and now I want to address the problem. You have heard rumors that this company is experiencing financial difficulties, and this has affected your enthusiasm to the point where you are no longer making the efforts you used to. If you return to your territories with a firm promise to send in 5 orders each over the next 30 days, this company will cease to have financial problems because this influx of orders would get us through. Will you do it?" They agreed to do so, and they did. This incident became famous in the history of the National Cash Register Company as the $1 million shoe shine of Hughes, because it is said to have completely turned around the company's situation and brought in millions of dollars. Enthusiasm knows no defeat. The sales manager who can instill enthusiasm in an army of salespeople can set his own price for his services, and what is even more important, he can increase the earning capacity of every person under his direction. Thus, his enthusiasm not only benefits him, but potentially hundreds of others as well. Enthusiasm is never a matter of luck. There are certain stimuli that produce enthusiasm, the most important of which are an occupation in the work one loves most, an environment where one interacts with other enthusiastic and optimistic people, financial success, complete mastery and daily application of the 15 laws of success, knowing that one has served others in a useful way, good appearance, suited to one's own occupation. All 7 of these sources of stimulation are self-explanatory, except for the last one. The psychology of clothing is understood by very few people, and for this reason, it will be explained here in detail. Clothing constitutes the most important part of the enhancement that every person must have to feel confident, hopeful, and enthusiastic. The psychology of good dressing. When the good news of the end of the war arrived on November 11, 1918, my worldly possessions were no more significant than they had been on the day of my birth. The war had destroyed my business and forced me to start over. My wardrobe consisted of 3 well-worn business suits and 2 uniforms that I no longer needed. Knowing full well that the world forms its first and most lasting impression of a person through the clothes they wear, I wasted no time in going to see my tailor. Fortunately, my tailor had known me for many years, so he did not judge me solely by the clothes I wore. Had that been the case, I would have ended up with less than $1 in my pocket. I selected the fabric for 3 of the most expensive suits I had ever owned and requested that they be made immediately. The 3 suits cost $375. I will never forget the tailor's comment as he took my measurements, first looking at the 3 rolls of expensive fabric I had selected and then at me. He asked, "A man who earns $1 a year," I replied, "if I had been fortunate enough to earn $1 a year, I might now have enough money to pay for these suits." The tailor looked at me in astonishment. I don't think he understood the joke. One of the suits was a precise dark grey, another was dark blue, and the third was light blue with a stripe. Fortunately, I had a good relationship with my tailor, so he did not ask when I would be paying for these expensive suits. He knew I could pay for them and that I would do so in due time, but I could have convinced him of that. It was the thought that ran through my mind, with hope against all odds that the question would not arise. Then I visited my haberdashery, where I bought 3 less expensive suits and a full supply of the best shirts, collars, ties, socks, and underwear. My bill at the haberdashery amounted to just over $300. With an air of prosperity, I handed the receipt to the salesman with instructions to deliver my purchase the next morning. The renewed feeling of confidence and success had begun to envelop me even before I put on the new suit. I had emerged from the war with a debt of $675, all within less than 24 hours. The next day, the first of the 3 ordered suits was delivered. I put it on immediately, slipped a new silk handkerchief into the outside pocket of the jacket, and placed the $50 I had borrowed for the ring into the pants pocket. I walked down Michigan Avenue in Chicago, feeling as rich as Rockefeller. Every garment I wore, from the underwear to the outerwear, was the best, and the fact that it wasn't paid for yet was only known to me, my tailor, and my haberdashery. Every morning, I dressed in a completely new suit and walked down the same street at the same time. It happened to be the time when a certain wealthy publisher usually passed by on his way to lunch. I had set myself the goal of speaking to him every day, and from time to time I would stop to chat for a minute after this daily encounter, which lasted about a week. One day I encountered the publisher, but I decided to see if I could pass by without speaking to him. Observing him through my lowered eyelids, I looked straight ahead and began to walk past him when he stopped and motioned for me to come to the edge of the sidewalk. He placed his hand on my shoulder, looked me up and down, and said, "You look remarkably prosperous for a man who has just left uniformed service." "Who makes your clothes?" I replied. "Well, Wilkie Celery made this particular suit." He wanted to know what kind of business I was in. The air of prosperity I had cultivated with a new and different suit every day had piqued his curiosity just as I had hoped. Taking out the ashes from my perfectly rolled cigar, I said to him, "I'm preparing a copy for a magazine I'm going to launch, a new magazine." "Oh," he said, "and what will you call it?" I replied, "It will be called The Golden Rule of Gill." "Don't forget," said my publisher friend, "that I am in the business of printing and distributing magazines. Perhaps I can help you as well." This was the moment I had been waiting for. I had envisioned this very moment, and almost the same spot on the sidewalk where we stood when I was buying those new suits. But it is necessary to remember that this conversation would never have taken place if this publisher had seen me walking down that street day after day with a beaten-down look on my face, an unpressed suit on my back, and a look of poverty in my eyes. An appearance of prosperity always attracts attention, without exception. Moreover, an appearance of prosperity attracts favorable attention, as the dominant desire in every human heart is to be prosperous. My publisher friend invited me to lunch at his club. Before the coffee and cigars were served, he had already convinced me not to sign the printing and distribution contract for my magazine, and he even agreed to provide the capital with no interest charges. For those unfamiliar with the publishing world, let me clarify that considerable capital is needed to launch a new magazine with national distribution. Large amounts of capital are often difficult to obtain, even with the best guarantees. The capital needed to launch The Golden Rule of Gill, which you may have read, was well over $30,000, and every cent was raised thanks to a facade primarily created by good clothing. It is true that there might have been some know-how behind these clothes, but many millions of men possess skills that no one knows about and which are never heard of outside the limited community in which they live. This is a rather sad truth for some. It may seem like an unforgivable extravagance for someone who was broke to have incurred a debt to buy 670 fowls worth of clothes. But the psychology of this investment more than justified it. The appearance of prosperity not only made a favorable impression on those from whom I sought favors, but it was even more important to highlight the effect that appropriate clothing had on myself. I knew not only that proper attire would favorably impress others, but also that good clothing would give me a self-confidence that I needed to hope to recover my lost fortune. My first lesson in the psychology of proper dressing came from my friend Edwins, a close associate of Thomas A. Edison. Barnes amused Edison's staff about 20 years ago when he arrived in West Orange on a freight train, unable to raise enough money for a ticket, and announced in Edison's offices that he had come to partner with Mr. Edison. Almost everyone around the Edison plant mocked Barnes, except for Edison himself. Edison saw something in the square jaw and determined face of young Barnes that most others did not. Although the young man appeared more like a vagrant than a future partner of the world's greatest inventor, Barnes started by sweeping the floors of Edison's offices. This was all he sought, an opportunity to make a place for himself in Edison's organization. From there, he made a story worth repeating by other young people eager to make a place for themselves. Barnes retired from active business, although he is still relatively young, and now spends most of his time in his two magnificent homes in Bradenton, Florida and Damariscotta, Maine. He is a prosperous and happy multimillionaire. I met Barnes during the early days of his association with Edison before he had achieved success. At that time, he had the largest and most expensive collection of clothing I had ever seen or heard of. His wardrobe consisted of 31 suits, one for each day of the month. He never wore the same suit 2 days in a row. Moreover, all his suits were of the highest quality. In fact, his clothes were made by the same tailors who made my suits. He wore socks costing $60 a pair, and his shirts and other garments were similarly priced. His ties were custom-made, costing $5 to $750 each. One day, intending to joke, I asked him to keep some of his old suits that he no longer used. He informed me that he had no suits that he did not use anymore. Then he gave me a lesson on the psychology of clothing that is worth remembering. "I don't wear 31 suits for the impression they make on others," he said. "I do it mainly for the impression they make on me." Barnes told me that he had to go around the factory a dozen times before he found the courage to present himself because he knew he looked more like a vagrant than a desirable employee. It is said that Barnes is the most skilled salesperson ever associated with the great inventor of West Orange. His entire fortune was made through his sales expertise, but he often said that he would never have achieved the results that made him rich and famous if he had not understood the psychology of clothing. I have known many salespeople in my life. Over the past 10 years, I have personally trained and directed the efforts of more than 3,000 salespeople, both men and women, and I have observed that, without exception, the best producers were all people who understood and used the psychology of clothing well. I have seen a few well-dressed people who did not achieve exceptional records as salespeople, but I have not yet met a poorly dressed man who became a top producer. In the field of sales, I have studied the psychology of clothing for so long and observed its effects on people from many different backgrounds that I am fully convinced that there is a close connection between clothing and success. Personally, I do not feel any need for 31 suits, but if my personality required a wardrobe of that size, I would make sure to obtain it, whatever the cost. To be well dressed, a man should have at least 10 suits, a different suit for each of the 7 days of the week, a complete suit and a tuxedo for formal evening occasions, and a suit for formal afternoon occasions. For summer clothing, he should have an assortment of at least 4 suitable lightweight suits, with a blue coat and white flannel pants for informal afternoon and evening occasions. If he plays golf, he should have at least 1 golf suit. Of course, this is for the man who is 1 or 2 steps above the mediocre class. The man who settles for mediocrity needs few clothes. It is true, as a well-known poet once said, that clothes do not make the man, but no one can deny that good clothing greatly contributes to a good start. Generally, a bank will lend all the money a man wants when he does not need it, when he is prosperous. But never go to your bank asking for a loan wearing a worn-out suit and with a look of poverty in your eyes, because if you do, you will be shown the door. Success attracts success. There is no way to escape this great universal law. So, if you wish to attract success, make sure to give the appearance of success, whether your vocation is that of a worker or a merchant prince. For the benefit of the most deserving students of this philosophy, who might object to using material stimulants or elaborate clothing as a means to achieve success, it may be useful to clarify that practically all successful men on earth have discovered some form of stimulation through which they can push themselves to greater effort. It is true, however, that James Whitcomb Riley wrote his best poems under the influence of alcohol. His stimulant was alcohol. I wish to make it clear that I do not recommend the use of alcoholic or narcotic stimulants for any purpose, as each will eventually destroy both the body and mind of those who use them. Under the influence of alcohol, Riley became imaginative, enthusiastic, and a completely different person. According to his personal friends, Edwin Barnes motivated himself to produce extraordinary results through quality clothing. Some men reach great heights of success due to their love for a woman. Relate this to the brief suggestion on the subject made in the introductory lesson, and you, if you are a person who understands human nature, may conclude this discussion on this particular phase of stimulating enthusiasm without further comments from the author. That might not be appropriate for younger minds who will absorb this philosophy. Street people who engage in dangerous activities like armed robbery or theft usually get high on cocaine, morphine, and other narcotics before their operations. Even this contains a lesson showing that virtually all men need temporary or artificial stimulants to push them to a level of effort beyond what is normally provided in ordinary activities of life. Successful people have discovered the means they find most suitable for their own needs to produce stimulants that elevate them to heights of effort above the norm. One of the world's most successful writers uses a group of elegantly dressed young women who play for him while he writes, seated in a room artistically decorated to his taste, under colored and subdued lights. These young women, dressed in beautiful evening gowns, play his favorite music. According to his own words, I intoxicate myself with enthusiasm under the influence of this environment and reach heights that I do not know and do not experience on other occasions. That is when I do my work. Thoughts come to me as if dictated by an invisible and unknown power. This author draws much of his inspiration from music and art. Once a week he spends at least an hour at the art museum observing the works of the masters. On such occasions, using his own words again, an hour of visiting the art museum excites me enough to last 2 days. Edgar Allan Poe wrote The Raven, it is said, while he was more than half drunk. Oscar Wilde wrote his poems under the influence of a type of stimulant that cannot be appropriately mentioned in a course of this nature. Henry Ford also believes this. This author admits that it is a simple, personal opinion. His true breakthrough came through his love for his charming life partner. It was she who inspired him, gave him confidence, and kept him going in the face of adversities that would have defeated a dozen normal men. These incidents are cited as evidence that men with exceptional achievements have discovered, either by accident or by design, ways to stimulate themselves to a high level of enthusiasm. Connect what has been said here with what was discussed regarding the mastermind principle in the introductory lesson, and you will have a completely new understanding of the modus operandi through which this principle can be applied. You will also gain a somewhat different perspective on the true purpose of effort, allied with a spirit of perfect harmony, which constitutes the best-known method for putting the mastermind principle into practice. At this point, it seems appropriate to draw your attention to how the lessons in this course interconnect. You will notice that each lesson covers the intended subject while simultaneously overlapping and offering the student a better understanding of another lesson or lessons in the course in light of what has been said in this lesson. For example, the student will have a better understanding of the true purpose of the mastermind principle, which is primarily a practical means of stimulating the minds of all members of the mastermind group. Too often to describe here, The author has attended meetings with men whose faces showed signs of concern, giving the appearance of worry, only to see these same men straighten their shoulders, tilt their chins at a higher angle, soften their faces with confident smiles, and start working with an enthusiasm that knows no defeat. The change occurred when the harmony of goals was established. If a man approaches the affairs of life with the same prosaic and unenthusiastic spirit, day after day, he is doomed to failure. Nothing can save him until he changes his attitude and learns to stimulate his mind and body to unusual heights of enthusiasm at will. The author does not wish to leave this topic without stating the principle described here in so many different ways that it must be understood and also respected by the students of this course, who, let us remember, are men and women of all sorts of natures, experiences, and degrees of intelligence. For this reason, repetition is essential. Your goal in life, I remind you once again, is to succeed with the stimulus you will experience while studying this philosophy, and with the help of the ideas you will derive from it, as well as the personal cooperation of the author, who will provide you with an accurate inventory of your exceptional qualities. You should be able to create a definitive plan that will elevate you to great heights of success. However, no plan can produce the desired result without the aid of some influence that awakens you with a spirit of enthusiasm, to the point of providing an effort greater than that which you put into your daily occupations. Are you ready to make the choice regarding self-control? By listening to this lesson, you will find that you have a vital connection to it, just as it is directly connected to the previous lessons on a defined main objective, self-confidence, initiative, and leadership, as well as imagination. The next lesson describes the law that serves as the balancing wheel for this entire philosophy, the 7 deadly enemies. In an after-class visit with the author, the 7 deadly enemies are named in the following order: intolerance, greed, revenge, selfishness, suspicion, envy, and the worst enemy of all, the one who walks under his own hat. If you could see yourself as others see you, the enemies you harbor within your own personality might be discovered and expelled. The 7 enemies named in this essay are the most common ones that lead millions of men and women to failure without being detected. Examine yourself carefully and discover how many of the 7 you harbor in that image. You will see 7 deadly warriors. From birth to death, every human being must battle these enemies. Your success will be largely measured by how you handle your battle against these swift riders. Looking at this image, you might say that it is just imagination. It is true that the image is imaginary, but the swift riders of destruction are real. If they were riding actual horses openly, they would not be dangerous because they could be cornered and put out of commission. However, they operate discreetly within the minds of men, working so silently and subtly that most people never recognize their presence. Take an inventory of yourself and find out how many of these 7 riders you harbor. In the foreground, you will find the most dangerous and common of the riders. You will be fortunate if you discover this enemy and protect yourself against him. This cruel warrior, intolerance, has killed more people, destroyed more friendships, brought more misery and suffering to the world, and caused more wars than all the other 7 riders you see in this image. Until you master intolerance, you will never become an accurate thinker. This enemy of humanity shuts the mind and pushes reason, logic, and facts to the background. If you find yourself hating those whose religious views differ from your own, you can be sure that the most dangerous of the 7 deadly riders is still lurking in your mind. Next, in the image, you will see revenge and impudence. These riders travel side by side. Where one is, the other is always close by. Impudence distorts and twists the human brain so that it wants to build a fence around the earth and keep everyone else out. It is the enemy that drives a man to amass millions and millions of dollars he does not need and can never use. It is the enemy that makes a man turn the screw until he has squeezed the last drop of blood from his fellows. And, with revenge riding impudence, the unfortunate one who allows these cruel twins to settle in his mind does not merely strip his neighbor of earthly possessions, but also wants to destroy his reputation in business. Revenge is a naked sword without guard or handle. If you wish to wield this mark of the Lord, then take it firmly and harshly. But the closer you are to the sword, the deadlier the blow, the deeper the wound in your hand. Your own blood stains the steel, and when you strike, when the blade of your hand flies instead of the enemy's heart, you may find it buried in your own. If you want to understand how deadly envy and impudence are, study the history of all those who have attempted to become the rulers of this world. If you do not wish to undertake such an ambitious research program, then observe the people around you, those who have tried and those who are now trying to pluck their own nest at the expense of others. Impudence and revenge are at the crossroads of life, where they lead to fiasco and misery for anyone wishing to follow the path of success. It is part of your task to ensure that they do not interfere with you as you approach these crossroads. Both individuals and nations decline rapidly when impudence and envy dominate the minds of their leaders. Look at Mexico and Spain if you want to see what becomes of the envious and the greedy. Most importantly, examine yourself and ensure that these two deadly enemies are not riding in your mind. Now turn your attention to two other twins of destruction, selfishness and suspicion. Note that they also go hand in hand. There is no hope for success for the person who suffers from excessive self-love or a lack of trust in others. Someone who likes to manipulate figures has calculated that the largest club in the world is that of those who cannot trust themselves. It is said that there are about 99 million members of this club in the United States alone. If you do not trust others, you do not have the seed of success within you. Doubt is a prolific germ. If it is allowed to start, it multiplies rapidly until it leaves no room for faith. Without faith, no man can achieve lasting success. Like a golden thread that weaves through the entire Bible, there is the warning to believe before civilization loses itself in its mad rush for dollars. Men understood the power of faith, for I tell you the truth. If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, "Move from here to there," and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you. The writer of this passage in the Bible understood a great law that very few people understand today. Believe in people if you want them to believe in you. Eliminate doubt, or it will destroy you. If you want to have power, cultivate faith in humanity. Selfishness thrives where there is doubt. Show interest in others, and you will be too occupied to indulge in self-love. Observe those around you who start every sentence with the personal pronoun I, and you will see that they doubt others. The person who can forget himself by dedicating himself to useful service to others is never cursed by doubt. Study those around you who are both suspicious and selfish, and see how many of them you can name as successful in their work. While you are conducting this study of others, also study yourself. Make sure you are not bound by selfishness and doubt. At the back of this deadly group of riders, you see two riders. One is envy, and the other is intentionally omitted. Each reader of this article can take an inventory of himself and name the seventh rider, the one corresponding to what he finds in his own mind. Some will call this rider dishonesty, others procrastination. A few will have the courage to call it uncontrolled sexual desire. As for you, give it whatever name you like, but make sure to give it a name. Perhaps your own imagination will provide an appropriate name. As with envy, you will be better prepared to name the nameless rider if you understand that jealousies and envy are a form of madness. The facts are sometimes cruel to face. It is a fact that jealousy is a form of madness, known to the medical fraternity as madness of jealousy. The most hideous demon from hell, your mortal poison feeds on my entrails, turns the healthy color of my fresh cheeks into a pale pallor, and drinks my spirit. You will note that envy rides just behind suspicion. Some will say that envy and suspicion should ride side by side, as one often leads the other in the mind of a person. Envy is the most common form of madness that settles in the minds of men and women, sometimes for a real reason, but more often without any valid reason. This deadly rider is a great friend of divorce lawyers. He also keeps detective agencies busy day and night. He claims his usual due in murders, in the tearing apart of homes, in widows and in orphans among innocent children. Peace and happiness can never be yours as long as this rider remains in your mind. A man and woman can spend their lives together in poverty and be very happy, provided they are free from this son of madness known as envy. Examine yourself carefully And if you find the slightest trace of envy in your mind, begin immediately to master it. Envy manifests in many ways. When it begins to enter the brain, it appears like this: I wonder where he is and what he is doing while I am not there, or I wonder if he is looking at another woman when he is away from me. When these questions start to arise in your mind, do not call a detective. Instead, go to a psychiatric hospital and get examined, for you are likely suffering from a mild form of madness. Stamp out envy before it tightens its grip around your throat. After reading this essay, put it aside and reflect on it. At first, you might think it does not apply to you, that you have no imaginary riders in your mind, and you might be right. 1 in 10 million might say this and be correct. The other 9,999,999 would be wrong. Do not be deceived. You might be part of this larger class. The goal of this article is for you to see yourself as you are. If you suffer from failure, poverty, or misery in any form, you will surely discover one or more of these deadly riders in your mind. Do not be mistaken. Those who have everything they desire, including happiness and good health, have expelled the 7 riders from their minds. Return to this essay in a month after you have had time to analyze yourself carefully. Listen to it again, and it might confront you with facts that will free you from a host of cruel enemies who now ride in your mind without your knowing it.